Hey everyone, Wazoo here, and in this video we're going to be building a TodoItem's REST controller API server using Java Spring Boot. Oh, that was a big mouthful. Anyways, this will be a quick little project to demonstrate how to build your own API server using Java Spring Boot, and I'll try and start with the demo here as I normally try to do. So if you as you can see, I've got the server up and running in the background that we're going to be building, and on the command prompt you can type in curl http localhost 8080 API v1 TodoItems, and as you can see I'm returning two TodoItems. And if you don't normally use curl in the command line, there are many apps like this, but one of the more popular options is an app called Postman. And so in Postman you can just enter a URL here, so localhost 8080 API v1 TodoItems, and make sure you're using the GET request and then hit send, and then in the response we can see that we've got the TodoItems that I've got in the database coming out in the JSON here. So that's what we'll be building today. I think this will be pretty cool. Stick around and we'll have a lot of fun. Okay, as with our normal projects, or not normal, as with every other project that we've done, we're going to be starting at start.spring.io. This is a awesome generator for your Java Spring Boot applications to just get you up and going with a common configuration that you can begin projects with. So as you can see, I'm going to be picking a Maven project. We're going to be using Java. In this episode we're using version 2.7.0 of Spring Boot, but I'm imagining that 3.0 is going to be eventually incoming. For our project metadata info, we can keep the group as com.example, and then for our artifact, let's type in Spring Boot Todo API Server. Nice and long. There we go. And as you can see, it'll automatically fill out the name field for us. Description, you can leave it the default, and you'll see our package name here. We'll leave our packaging as a jar file, and we'll be using Java 18. And let's go ahead and add some dependencies. So first we're going to be adding Spring Boot Dev Tools, and then we're going to be adding Lombok, and then we're going to be adding Spring Data JPA, and then Spring Web, and then we're going to add validation, and I believe that is it. Oh, we need a database, so let's add H2. We'll be using the H2 database, and let's go ahead and scroll through our list. So we've got the Dev Tools, Lombok, Spring Data, Web, Validation, H2 database. I think that's all we're going to need. So go ahead and hit that generate button. So I've downloaded the zip file that start.spring.io generated for us for the project, and I've got it open here in, as you can see, in Visual Studio Code. And the first thing I usually try to do is set up the database. So I go into application.properties, which contains all of the configuration info for your Spring Boot server. And I'm going to be defining a port, so server.port of 8080, and then I'm going to be adding some database configuration settings here. So if we use Spring data source URL, we can use JDBC H2 file, and then data Todo API, and then Spring data source. I'll try and cut through all these quickly. Driver class name of org.h2.driver, and then spring.datasource.username of admin, and then spring data source password of admin as well, and a Spring JPA database platform of org.hibernate.dialect.h2 dialect. And I've gone through these settings before in the actual Spring Boot to-do application video, and so you feel free to go back and rewatch that segment. These are settings that I often have to Google all the time myself when setting up a Spring Boot project, so don't feel bad if you haven't memorized them after your 20th project. I certainly don't. That's what Google's for, right? Okay, so spring.h2 console enabled. Let's enable that console, true. And then we can define our console path at just h2 console, and then we'll define one last hibernate setting of ddl auto equals update. Okay, so now we go ahead and save that file, and let's start up our project here. Now that we've got our settings set up, let's go ahead and test it out. Let's run our Spring Boot server with the Spring Boot dashboard extension. Oh, we gotta allow some Windows security here. Okay, and everything should start off. As you can see in the terminal window here, we've got our normal startup messages in the logs. And we're not returning anything, we're not doing anything with it, but everything is starting up okay. So let's go ahead and stop. And now let's add some stuff to our API server. Okay. So let's go back into our Java com example Spring Boot to do API server folder. And let's create 3 new folders for us that we're going to be eventually adding to as we go through this project. The first thing we're going to do, actually 4. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a folder called config, and then a new folder for models, and then a new folder for controllers, and then finally a new folder for repositories. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be creating our TodoItem model. So in the models folder, let's create a new file here and just call it TodoItem.java. And then we'll let Visual Studio Code fill in that it's a class for us. Okay, and we're going to be implementing serializable, which I almost always misspell, but I think that looks properly. This is going to be an entity, and let's go ahead and resolve that. Control dot. Okay, and the first thing we're going to do, this is very similar to the TodoItem model that we created in the Spring Boot API, or not Spring Boot API, Spring Boot to do application. So the first one we'll be creating here is an ID and a generated value that the database will generate for us. Strategy is generation type, and then we'll just use auto. We could also use sequence, and let's make use of Lombok by having it automatically generate getters and setters for us. And so now we've got an ID, and then now we have a getter and setter for description. I'll just check the video to make sure my face is not in the way. Maybe what I'm going to do is move myself to this corner. Okay, hopefully that keeps things legible. All right, so now we've got an ID and a description, and now we're going to be adding some. We're going to be adding the complete flag, which is a Boolean. So let's make use of the getter, setter, and then private Boolean complete. And then finally we're going to be adding a date. So create a date. And then a private instant create a date. Okay. And then let's go ahead and create a default constructor, just an empty one. And let's then create a override that we're going to need for the toString method, since we're implementing serializable. Oops, not public string toString, and this will come in handy when we're printing our to-do item to the console or to a log file, then it'll convert this to-do item into this. It'll make use of this two-string override. Okay, so let's format it, and we've got a to-do item, and let's do ID is %d, and then description is %s, and then complete is %s, oops, and then created date equals also %s, colon %s. Okay, and then we want to just fill in the ID, description, complete, and created date. Okay, so we've got a model you've seen. You should be familiar with, oops, oh, because that is not set up and resolved correctly. So we want to import from Java time. Okay. Oh, let's fix up this generated value from persistence. And that all looks good. Okay. So now we've got our model defined. Okay, so now we've got our model defined. So now let's add a TodoItem repository, which we need to do for any kind of persistence back to our database. So let's go ahead and create a new file, and we'll just call it TodoItemRepository.java. And it's going to be an interface, and we're going to be extends a CRUD repository. So create, read, update, delete repository of TodoItem and long. Okay, so control dot, we're importing that, and control dot, we're importing our TodoItem. Okay, everything looks good, and we're going to mark this with a repository annotation just to help out the Spring Framework. Okay, so we got the model, we got the repository, and so we're starting things up, but we still can't really see anything. So let's go ahead and create the controller, and the controller is the interface that we'll be hitting with our URL request for whatever API endpoint we want to make use of. So under the controllers file, let's go ahead and create a new file, and let's call it a TodoItemController. Okay, and then this will be a class, and we'll annotate it with a REST controller. And we're going to also be annotating it with a request mapping of /API v1 and TodoItems. Now, there's a lot of theory crafting and other excellent videos out there that all go through how to construct your API scheme, and it's pretty much up to you. You can really design it however you want. In our case, usually what I'm accustomed to when dealing with a lot of third-party APIs on the internet is that they have some kind of versioning flag built right into the URL. So that in that case, let's say for example, we implement this API TodoItems, and then all of a sudden for version 2, we want to enhance the TodoItems that we're returning back to the whoever's calling it on the via API, and we don't want to break any existing functionality. We want to be able to add some additional paths for users if our API ever goes that far, right? So just as a normal practice, I often just use a version flag right in the URL. But again, you can leave it out if you don't want it. It's up to you. That's kind of the neat thing about it. So we're going to be referencing the TodoItem repository. We're just going to be referencing that directly this time. I know in the to-do application video, we went through creating a service which then interfaces with the repository. And if you were to build this up into a quote-unquote proper API, then that's still the same approach I would take, is creating a proper service to interface with the repository instead of accessing it directly from the controller. But let's go ahead and create the constructor TodoItemController, and we'll be passing in via dependency injection. Spring Boot will handle passing in the repository for us. This TodoItem repository equals TodoItem repository. Okay, and lots of things to resolve. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we are going to be defining with the annotation a get mapping of an empty string. And then we're going to be returning a list of to-do item. So find all to-do items. And we're going to be returning a list, we have to cast it, of to-do items, item, repository, find all. Okay. So let's go ahead and resolve all these. We're using the Java util list. We're using the get mapping from bind annotation to do item from the models. And that looks like it's going to be everything. All right. Now this get mapping empty string is actually kind of important. What we'll do for now is I'm going to actually define it as the root. We're going to include a path /, and then I'll show you what happens when you try and request things from the command line or from Postman. Okay, but first what we're going to do is we're going to need a record. So let's go ahead in the config folder and let's create a new file, and we'll just call it data loader.java. And we are going to make this a class, and it's going to be implementing the command line runner. And this is kind of a way to seed our database, our empty database, with some initial data that we can use to query from. Oops. Okay. So we are going to be making use of the auto-wired annotation for this one, and we're going to pull in the TodoItem repository. TodoItem repository. Okay, and then we're going to be defining the override, the only override of this class. Throws exception. Okay, so first what we're going to do is we are going to be getting a list of all the to-do items. List to-do item repository, find all. Then we'll do a size to do a count of the items, and if we have 0, then it means we haven't put any data in here yet. So let's generate a new to-do item, and let's just give it a set description. Oops, hello world. And we'll set the created date to instant.now, and then we'll finally save this. To-do item repository, save to-do 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and resolve all these things. Blink. Oops. Oh, I keep doing that when I'm not looking at the keyboard. Okay, control period. Doink. Control period. Yoink. Control period. Yoink. Okay, so we've got everything defined. And we need to use the component annotation for our data loader. Okay. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and let's start this up. Dun, 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 dun. And we should see a whole bunch of, I'll enhance this a little bit. We should see a whole bunch of Hibernate messages saying that we've basically created the server, created the database, and populated it. So let's go ahead and show that. So I will go to localhost 8080 and let's go into our H2 console. And let's make sure that it's legible here. Okay, that does not look very legible. So let's increase that a little bit. Okay, so we're going to be using the file, and then the path to our JDBC database is Todo API, and then our username is admin, password admin. Let's connect. And as you can see, we've got our TodoItem table here, and let's highlight it and select run, or just type in select star from todo_item, and we should have one item here. The ID of 1, it's not completed yet, of course, so by default it's false. Created date is the instant the record was created, and our description of hello world. Perfect. And now let's see what that looks like in Postman. So let's go into Postman and let's... Okay, I don't like these weird windows. Makes it hard to present when this window here is quite small. Let's go ahead and hit send. And we get a 404. Now, why is that happening? If we add a slash to the end and we hit send, ta-da, we suddenly get our record. So what's going on here? So remember back in our controller, let's go to TodoItemController. Now we need to lower this down. We've got our get mapping of slash. So when we're entering /API /v1 /TodoItems in the path, in order for Spring Boot to find the mapping to this method, it's looking for the slash, the trailing slash that we've put on the URL. Now, personally, when it's just the default URL, the root getter URL, I guess, is kind of how I'd like to think about it. I normally don't append a slash at the end. So is there a way to do this in Spring Boot? And it turns out there is. All you have to do is make sure that the first the root get mapping of the path to the controller is just an empty string. And so what we'll do here is I'll demonstrate. Let's restart the server. Okay, server is restarted. So back in Postman, so if we use a slash at the end of TodoItems, we'll get our record. And if we leave it off, we should also get our record. Right on. That's pretty cool and handy, and just keeps your API feeling a little more stabler and less brittle. So imagine the while you're building this and while you're working on this, imagine some of the other APIs, third-party APIs that you might have been using for building other applications. And maybe it'll help you when you're designing this one. Okay, so we've got our get, and it's returning our to-do items. We've got a way to seed our database, and we can present it with the toString method, the override of the toString method within the model. Okay. That about wraps it up for this episode. Now don't worry, if you notice we only implemented the getAll request through our new To-Do API service, but don't worry, in the next episode, which I'll be recording in like 2 minutes, is going to be going through the rest of the CRUD methods. So we'll be able to create a new to-do item via our API, we'll be able to get a single to-do item, and we'll be able to update a to-do item. And oh, maybe we'll do a delete one as well. Might as well do all of them. So that'll be coming up in the next video in this mini series on creating your own to-do APIs, or to-do service APIs. Yeah, to-do API service. There we go. I think I said it right. The right combination of those 3 words. Anyways, have a really great day and just enjoy yourself wherever you are. Be safe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks, everyone. Peace.